Okay, welcome back. Let's talk about the equipment and supplies that we use for sleep studies. It's amazing to think about all the supplies and different kinds of equipment that you need. You need equipment that will record, monitor, and allow staging and scoring of the record. You need ancillary support like telephones, office computers, just for office things, maybe panic buttons, AED machines, and CPR backboards. You have some sensors and electrodes that aren't disposable and some that are. You have machines just for audio and visually monitoring the patient. Usually no one uses paper studies anymore, but think about the space needed to store those for a year at a time, and we're talking about two giant dictionaries side by side in a box, that big for one study. There also needs to be a way for these sleep studies digitally to be stored. Depending on what kind of sleep software you have, you will need additional computer storage or a third-party company to hold your data. These studies could be anywhere from 2 to 5 gigabytes of data, so everything is going to fill up really quickly as far as your storage. These are some of the bare minimum requirements for the sleep software and computers you have to use to be an accredited sleep lab. Up-to-date sleep software typically already has all this included, but the most labs using software have to be AASM certified, so they most likely as well should come ready to be used. Most likely these recommendations won't be plentiful on the exam, but there might be one or two. Talking about notch filters, the 60 hertz filter, the sampling rate has to be a certain. All throughout the sleep lab, you are surrounded by dozens of Cat5 cables, and you might know these more as internet cables. You need one for CPAP, one for an IP camera, one for a router, and one for the EEG signal, and then one to connect to the patient's room to the technologist's workstation. All these wires come together in routers, which allow the computers to connect to whatever room they need to. Typically, you'll have routers in rooms and in the control room. You'll also have these big black boxes. That's what these are. These are backup batteries. And in case of a blackout, you won't lose all of your data if you use those. To talk to your patient, you might have a audio control box. The LaRue AV equipment is very popular, especially in sleep labs. You might also have another box near this one that controls the zoom, tilt, and pan of the camera if the computer doesn't do it. At the workstation that controls the patient's room, it's common to have two monitors for one computer for the 2-to-1 tech ratio, and one computer is usually powerful enough to run two sleep studies at once. All you need is two monitors, and you've saved money on that extra computer. There are several sleep acquisition or collection software companies like Cadwell, Compumetics, Neoncodin, Natus, and Respironics. Respironics used to support a product called Alice. They're giving up on the sleep business. Sandman is also commonly used sleep software. This software usually comes in a bundle, meaning there's a program to run a sleep study. There's a program to go back and look through and score the study after it's done. And sometimes a program that just stores and manages all the study files is commonly called the study manager. All these programs do the same thing, but everything is formatted differently. In my personal experience, Compumetics has the best EEG tracings visually and power as far as you can do whatever you want to with the channels. Neoncodin is a close second with how good the signals appear. And I think Cadwell is a great practical option. It's not super flashy, but it's easy to work with, and it doesn't have many bugs in the software. Compumetics is a hoss to manage. It has several software bugs, and I don't even like to talk about Alice because I hate it. It's a horrible acquisition system. EEG gold cups, which are these, the gold cups, and then the EMG snap leads, which are these... and they hook into these little guys right there. That's why they're snap leads. EEG wires are used for all the 1020 locations, both mastoids the EOG and the chin EMG. If they're long enough, they can be used for the EKG signal and the limb EMG signals. There are also snap leads and the snap electrodes, which are good for limb EMG. I've also seen some labs that use snap leads for EOG and EMG, and I find that incredibly hard to keep on the face. They make small snap electrodes that can fit there, but the wires that they hook up to are heavy, and it's got a lot of weight to be held up by a little bit of tape. On the legs, though, those snap wires can be thicker and heavier and the gold cups and can last longer. When patients get out of bed, they can stand on a leg wire, and if they don't rip the tape off, they'll snap the wire in half. These wires can be tough, but they will break, and they'll stretch too, making it look like the wire's fine, but on the inside, the metal is actually severed. The only good way to make sure a wire is still good is to use an impedance checker or a wire checker, where you hook in a wire to these two places on this little thing, and if the light lights up, that means you have a good wire. There are a few respiratory sensors that work in conjunction to give a clear picture of what the patient's doing. Without one or two of these can make a study difficult to score. You'll find out soon enough why. First off, you've got the nose pieces, which are a thermistor, the piece that it can sometimes actually fit into the cannula. The AASM recommends using these for scoring apneas. When apneas occur, temperature is the most precise measurement to allow or to show if absolutely any air is passing in or out through the mouth. On the other hand, the nasal cannula, which is the part of the nasal pressure transducer, it makes a signal out of the actual pressure that the patient creates in their nose. This pressure can show a smaller signal and flow limitation, which is obstruction while still getting breaths in, similar to snoring, and it may in fact involve snoring. The important distinction here is pressure versus temperature. Pressure is used for hypopnea scoring. The snore microphone or snore sensor, there is a difference, believe it or not. It's placed on the throat. You can palpate the throat or feel the throat, have the patient hum, and place the sensor where the greatest vibration is felt. The difference between a snore mic and a snore sensor is the mechanism through which the signal is produced. A snore sensor uses a piezo crystal, which gives off an electrical current when moved or stretched, and a snore microphone is much like a microphone for voice recording, and it uses a small spring which vibrates in concordance with whatever you're trying to record. And these are the RIP belts. Also could be piezo belts or respiratory inductance plethysmography belts. They may be able to hook directly into the head box, or they might have a little box like this that has a battery pack that I have to plug into first. For monitoring oxygen, we use pulse oximetry, which you might see as SpO2, which stands for saturation of peripheral oxygen. Peripheral because it's on the extremities, on the finger or on the toe, and away from the midline of the body. You may also see SaO2, which means saturation of arterial blood oxygen, but it's the same thing. Arteries are the vessels that carry oxygenated blood through the body, and an infrared light shines through the probe and shines through the finger. The amount of light that comes through on the other side is measured on the other side of the probe and converted into a signal, usually percentage. If your blood is 100% saturated with oxygen, the SpO2 would read 100%. You will not see many hundreds or even 99s. Usually those are artifact in the sleep lab. It's just too high. You really just don't see that. 96 to 98 is very good. The finger probes come in all sorts of styles, and it just depends on what kind of equipment your lab uses as to what probe you can use. A couple big names of brands are Massimo and Nonin. Respironics was also in on it, but they got out of sleep. They might still be getting some respiratory products out, though. And here's some of the examples. Here's a sticker one that you put on the finger or the toe or the foot. Sometimes you have a little rubber sleeve thing that you can fit on. You can just have two ends of a probe, tape one into one finger, one into the other. You do want to make sure that the probes are straight when they go on the finger. You don't want them to be crooked. That can affect it. Capnographs are used to measure carbon dioxide retention. End tidal capnographs use a cannula to measure the highest point of CO2 during respiration, which is at the end of a tidal breath, hence the name end tidal. Sometimes you can use the same cannula as you would the nasal pressure transducer, but sometimes you have to use an additional cannula on top of the cannula used for nasal pressure. The yellow machine here you see we had at Raleigh, and they use special cannulas that you have to buy, and they actually have a gold tip on the cannulas, and if you don't use those cannulas, the machine won't work. The capnography cannula will sometimes have a little mouthpiece that hangs in front of the mouth to pick up oral breaths. End tidal capnography might be abbreviated ETCO2. On the other hand, you can have a transcutaneous capnograph, which uses a heated sensor that just uses adhesive and it sticks to the patient's skin. But you have to be careful with these because they can burn the skin, so you have to move them a couple times throughout the night depending on how long the study is. Transcutaneous CO2 is abbreviated TCCO2. Consumables are the supplies needed for a sleep study that are one-time use only. 1020 paste is conductive paste that electrodes are filled with. This is it. To stick to the body as well as to create an electrical connection between the electrode and the skin. The thing that makes 1020 paste conductive is salt. New Prep gel, right here, is an abrasive gel. Abrasive means it scrubs off. And it cleans the skin and prepares it for an electrode. Remember that if you rub hard enough, you can break the skin and make a patient bleed. You also don't want to scrub so hard that it leaves a red mark. You use the long Q-tip looking cotton swab applicators to scrub the skin. You can use a tongue depressor to spread the 1020 paste onto gauze and cover up the electrode that way, also making it stay on there a little bit better. If a patient's skin is oily or dirty, you can use alcohol prep pads to clean it up. That once it's dried off, it makes tape stick very well. Cover roll tape is very popular, and it's great for everything you need on a patient's skin. It comes out long and thick so that you can cut out the size that you want, like small for the face or giant for the leg EMGs. A lot of other labs use this really cheap paper tape. And one of the reasons I like these is because you can use this stuff here. It's adhesive remover. And this stuff gets absorbed by this gauze-like tape. It stretches, this tape does. And when it gets absorbed, that makes it come off super easy. Paper tape doesn't do that. It's not. It doesn't get through very well. Or this transport stuff, it doesn't stick to skin very well either. But the transport tape is good for taping the slack of the wires to the patient's shoulder, or the limb EMGs to the outside of the pants to keep them from being pulled off. Cannulas, nasal cannulas, are one-time use only because and the sticker snap-on electrodes are also disposable. You want to scrub the skin for all the electrodes that are gold cups or snap leads, the ones that you're getting an actual electrical signal from the patient. You don't need to scrub for the thermistor, the snore mic, or things like that. The patient's room and the control room will have some of the same equipment. They're both likely to have routers, which allow several pieces of equipment signal to flow into one computer. The routers use these Cat5 cables or Ethernet cables or Internet cables that you use at home. There usually is a big white headbox looking thing that are usually off to the side in the patient room with a big long thick cable coming back that actually hooks up into the headbox. And this big white box is the amplifier. That's the machine that takes super small brain waves and makes them bigger, or amplifies them so that we can see them. Much like the amplifier in a car with a loud stereo, it takes music and makes, that stuff annoyingly loud. Some head boxes have the amplifier built in, like the Compumedics Grail head box, but this makes the head box incredibly fragile and susceptible to damage. They are also incredibly expensive to repair. You'll also have the backup battery in the patient's room. The patient's room has equipment that needs power too, so there's no use in having a battery at the technologist's computer if it can't record things coming in from an electronically dark room. So CPAPs have come a long way. This is what they used to look like when they first came out. Essentially, it's just a vacuum cleaner that's on reverse and made sure that it's pushing at a certain pressure. In the 80s, they had an on and off switch, and that was just about it. It was large and loud and didn't have any humidity. In the 90s, you start seeing humidifiers that are sold separately, and that could be placed under the CPAP machine. 2000s brought humidifiers as standard on CPAP machines, and the machines are also smaller. You start getting LCD screens that showed you some data. These machines were also when you could start holding down a couple buttons and access the clinical menu, which allowed you to change the settings and pressure. Patients aren't usually knowing about that. That's something that techs can use. Into the 2010s, PAPs came more personalized. We had PAPs for him and her. There are some travel PAPs available. They used SD cards, which could store information that could be turned into the doctor for compliance and treatment maintenance. And, they also had nice digital screens instead of the LCDs. Now, PAP machines have wireless internet capabilities so that the physician can download compliance information from their office. A lot of insurance companies demand compliance downloads to pay for the patient's treatments. Here's a good example of CPAP equipment that you'll find in the lab. This is the TX Link. And it's the adapter box that allows the computer to talk to the CPAP. These are incredibly hard to find right now. Sleep things are a little scarce to purchase for labs, and it's been that way since COVID. With the TX Link application on your computer, you can change all the settings on the CPAP from your computer, so you don't have to go into the room every time the pressure needs to be changed or you want to do EPR or something like that. If there is ever a problem with the TX Link, like it's not being recognized by the computer or you can't connect the computer to the CPAP, a lot of times because one of these wires is not plugged in all the way. Make sure they all click in and make sure all the wires from the CPAP and into the TX Link is plugged in well. If that doesn't work, I would unplug the power to the TX box and the router, which the TX box probably plugs in as well. You wait 20 seconds and then you plug it all back in. You might be surprised how often doing this works to fix things. 99% of the time, whatever isn't working wasn't plugged in correctly. I've been a genius to several people just because I made sure everything was plugged in. This looks like a good example of what a sleep lab CPAP is going to look like. It's going to have the humidification component and the PAP machine itself. Inside the humidity thing, there's a humidity chamber that you can remove and fill it with water. This is also a good assortment of masks. We have nasal pillows coming out with the hose in the front. Then you have the Dreamwear, and the Dreamwear has this whole side piece is kind of a part of the hose, and the hose connects up here. So it's a style that puts the hose at the top of the head, and it supposedly keeps the hose out of the way better. Those are also nasal pillows. There's another nasal pillow, but instead of two pieces that stick out from the mask and into the nose, it's just a cushion, and it's just like a hole that sits against the nose. Next, we have the nasal mask right here, and that just covers the nose. I think that's a great starter mask, and I think this works better with patients who have deviated septums. There's something about pressurizing the environment around your nose instead of trying to pressurize both nostrils. You just don't get enough air in when you have that condition. Then there's the full face mask. This was one of my favorites, the Sim Plus. It has the hose coming out the front, very robust headgear material. Here's the Dreamwear full face mask. This is a hybrid mask. It has the nasal cushion. Instead of going over the nose, it goes under the nose, and this is the Dreamwear hose at the top of the head. You also might hear the term interface. That's just the part of the mask that comes in contact with the patient. This is also just what you could call a mask. Finally, the total face mask. Not the full face mask, the total face mask. Is the least used face mask. That wouldn't work because her hair is all up in that mask. But it covers the entire face. If you look at the full face mask and the nasal mask and the pillows, you can see that there's a lot of extra space in that full face mask. And we call that dead space. That dead space has to be pressurized, and most of the time you need an additional 2 to 3 centimeters more pressure to get the patient fixed on those masks when compared to a nasal mask. That's something to keep in mind. Patients have prescriptions for masks for that reason. If they're set for 8 centimeters on a nasal mask and then they switch to a full face mask, it's not going to be enough. They need more like 10 or 11. Here's some more CPAP stuff. There are 2 kinds of hoses. One that's just normal. It's just regular plastic. And this is one that actually has a heated coil that runs into the hose, and that helps with humidity. This is an adapter that hooks to the hose, that hooks into the CPAP, and then this little thing right here, this nozzle connects to oxygen, so an oxygen concentrator can hook up. This is a SoClean device that's supposed to clean your CPAP machine for you. For the patient's recording room camera, it could either be controlled by a computer if it is an IP camera, or it can be controlled by a control box. Every device that connects to the internet, be your cell phone, your computer, your smart TV, it has something called an IP address, which is the way the internet organizes who is online. IP stands for Internet Protocol. An IP camera is a camera that can be controlled over Ethernet and has an IP address. Phone, voice over IP, or VoIP, is another internet phone service. Some head boxes have IP addresses, and some CPAP equipment also have IP addresses. Otherwise, there will be just a control box with zoom, tilt, pan control so you can move the camera to see the patient better. Some labs have a camera that doesn't move at all, and that can be annoying. The audio surveillance equipment can be handled a couple of different ways. Usually there is a control box that you can click a lever and talk to the patient, and you can hear them all the time. This may be different from the audio recording that is for the sleep study. In any case, you have to record audio during the sleep study, and you need a way for the patient to communicate with you in case of need for the bathroom or something like that. If a lab runs 10 studies a week, that's 520 studies a year. If every study is 2.5 gigabytes big, that's 1,300 gigabytes of data, or 1.3 terabytes, and that's being fairly conservative as far as studies go. Studies can take up more space, and labs probably run more than 10 studies a week. Some run at least 10 a night. That's a lot of data. And there are rules saying you have to save studies for so many years. You can do certain things like delete the video after a month to cut down on space, but that only goes so far. Hard disk drives are data storage devices that we used to use in old computers. They use a spinning disk and a magnetic arm that writes information on the disk. These are cheaper than solid-state drives, but they're slower and more prone to failure because they have moving parts. Solid-state drives have great capacity and data capability. The availability when you want something is almost instant. You turn the computer on and everything's there immediately. These, however, are much more expensive and still can fail. Magnetic tape is really old, but it's steady, and regularly used. It's a regularly used way of storing data, believe it or not. The problem with magnetic tape is it's susceptible to weathering from friction from the tape against the metal reels. It's how it's read, and the celluloid covering can flake off. Magnetic tape is also pretty cheap and is only usually used with third-party data storers. Other supporting items you will need are like a CPR backboard when patients are in bed. You need something to push down against, or you'll just be pushing the patient into the bed and not giving good compressions. A bag mask for CPR should also be available, as should an AED machine and a fire extinguisher. The AED machine has batteries and sticky pads, and they need to be replaced if they get past the expiration date. I believe the AASM recommends a log to make sure these things are always in working condition, because the last thing you want during a heart attack is an AED with bad batteries. A standard first aid kit should also be available. Oxygen concentrators or cylinders may be used if it's not a hospital that has oxygen piped into the rooms from the walls. Also, you'll need printers, scanners, copiers, telephones, and office computers to do all the tedious and menial stuff. You can order all these fine products and more from the MVAP catalog or from a Grainger catalog. I'm sure you've heard the commercials. They're both online. MVAP will have everything you need for sleep study stuff, and Grainger will have things like desks, chairs, things to hang wires on, functional furniture, office needs. Amazon is also becoming a popular place to purchase inexpensive supplies with its free Prime delivery, and that's going for like snap electrodes, and you can even find some nasal cannulas and stuff on there. Alright, that's enough. That's a lot of equipment and stuff that you have to take care of in the sleep lab, and you have to clean it. That's a whole other story on disinfecting your wires and stuff. So, alright, absorb that, and I'll talk to you later.